Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday, July 15th, 2024. Time for another show, another week of shows, and what a weekend it's been. I'm sure you had quite a time this weekend, and maybe you, like me, spent the weekend thinking about the spectacular events and how close we all came and how tantalizingly close, and just what an opportunity was missed. I'm speaking, of course, of the fact that Netroots Nation was held this past weekend in Baltimore, so close to me, and I had no idea. I really actually did miss entirely the promotion of Netroots Nation. I'm very old, and I don't go to these things that much these days, and but I could have reached this one. So close. I can't believe how close we came to having a spectacular weekend, just by driving a few miles up to Baltimore. But I did not take the opportunity. A couple of other things, probably, to round up for the weekend. I'm not really certain what it is exactly, but I understand this morning that Morning Joe is not on the air for some reason. Probably he's very angry about having missed Netroots Nation as well. All right, the joke is over. We know exactly what we're talking about having happened over the weekend. Netroots Nation did, in fact, occur at Baltimore. What a place to have been, I'm sure, when the nation heard the news. And everyone will remember exactly where they were the day that apparently the Uvalde Police Department was put in charge of presidential security. But there we go. Hey, come on, it's old news already. We don't care about this. Tell us about something else. Well, there's news about the news, of course. As I mentioned, Morning Joe, I didn't monitor this. I don't look. Greg may have some idea because he occasionally will turn it on. But I guess the networks are approaching this as they're angry that they didn't get maybe the chance to do this as breaking news as it was happening because it was a Saturday, so they're treating Monday as Saturday, and today we're all, I guess, adopting hushed mode. I don't think so. We had a whole day to digest this thing, so I don't know. We move forward, but I guess they felt Joe Scarborough would somehow be inappropriate in his treatment of not Netroots Nation, but the assassination attempt, I guess, against Donald Trump, which I'm sure you've heard about, and decided that they would not risk it somehow, that he would, I don't know, that's amazing that they would take him off the air, and he must be livid, too, although, I don't know, maybe he likes putting his feet up and relaxing. Justice says they're maybe afraid of Mika, and that could be true, but anyway, it just seems like kind of a bizarre reaction to the whole thing, and if you have a successful formula, successful show, and what would I know about that? And maybe they don't. It's just they have what they have. But you would think they're under the impression that Morning Joe is a successful show for them, and that the audience was probably spending most of the evening Saturday and all day Sunday saying, "I can't wait to see how this is treated on Morning Joe tomorrow," and they're not doing it. It's bizarre, the things that executives decide about how they're going to use their networks. I can't explain it, but there you have it. What a day. And you probably were waiting over the weekend. Well, how will they treat this incident on Monday? And I don't know. What else are we going to do with it? I know this much. Circulating this morning, one of the wilder takes I've ever seen on anything, and Philip Bump, I think, agrees and was distributing it to everybody. Axios is like fully fantasizing this whole thing, that they view it as, what if? They're not saying he's done it yet, although I guess by afternoon they will have crowned him with this accomplishment. But what if Donald Trump, I guess, takes their advice? And how you could use an incident like this to come back humbled and convinced of the need for moderation and unifying the country. He has a rare opportunity to unify the country by doing something or another, or becoming more moderate, I guess. And they're trying to pitch the whole, well, come face to face with death and it can change a person. And I'm sure that it could, except that as it happens, we have prior experience with Trump nearly dying in a very public way. But he didn't that time, and it didn't humble or moderate him in any way that I can recall. It's a ridiculous thing to do and ridiculous projection just now at this point. But, man, I don't know. Well, Greg Dworkin is here. He, too, missed Netroots Nation this weekend. Everybody missed this weekend, apparently. And that was, the big news. I know you were probably sorry not to be there, Greg. How are you this morning?
I'm just fine, thank you.
Okay, well, that's good. It's good to know that there are people who came through the weekend just fine.
Well, it's a reminder that you mentioned that we know how Trump handles a near battle with death. In fact, what he does is try to take everybody with him. He took out Herman Cain and he tried to take out Joe Biden. Those are just facts.
I guess
I'm not using hyperbole.
That's true. The weapon is a little less stealthy this time. So if he's going to start taking shots at others, I think we'll notice. But Donald Trump was not humbled or moderated in any way. If anything, it was worse. And he figured everybody should struggle with this. I don't know how he can project it this time, this way, but it's certainly a bad bet that he'll become much better.
What he did
now.
do, which was certainly political gold for him.
Oh yes,
was market the picture of him holding his fist up in the air.
Yes,
as a bloodied ear was seen in the picture. Now, we don't know whether he was shot or whether that was, as initially reported, shrapnel from the teleprompter and broken glass. Doesn't matter. It's a very good political picture.
Yeah, his ear was not supposed to be like that.
But he's fine.
Yes.
He was not injured, which is wonderful. And we don't know that much about the shooter yet, other than he fits into what you unfortunately might call a typical profile of a young alienated male, who was bullied in his classes by accounts of his classmates, and who was wearing a gun sight T-shirt at the time of the shooting. We don't know why he did it, but an alienated, bullied young kid. I mean, I'm from Newtown. This is somewhat familiar.
Yes. Well, I'm from America. It's familiar. This is the same story in many, many places. Extraordinarily similar to the Newtown story, of course. His parents' gun, absconded with it. Thankfully, nobody killed at home. So
we don't know how much the parents encouraged it, but certainly the gun wasn't locked up, so that's a mistake.
Yeah.
We know that the shooting team at his high school threw him off because he wasn't a good shot and they figured he was dangerous. That's been reported.
I mean, I did not know that. I forgot that sometimes there are even such things as shooting teams in high schools, which may or may not be a great idea, but okay. In this case,
sport,
they threw him off.
Just like any other sport.
Although, he wasn't close. It wasn't a terrible shot for far away and under duress. But, just objectively speaking.
He was able to shoot somebody, which was not a good thing.
No.
Even though he missed his target.
And I know it's sort of like, well, this is competitive shooting. It's targets. I know. But the whole idea is to be able to hit a person. So come on.
So it's a terrible thing. And, two aspects of it really to discuss this morning. The meaning of it all and how we're looking in the abyss on the one hand. And the way the media has proven to us that they've learned absolutely nothing since mission accomplished.
Terrific.
Since they want to make it a centerpiece of the news, but this is not, those days anymore. 2003, whenever that was. I can't remember.
Mission
But
accomplished.
you know, you don't have everybody watching CNN on this anymore. You don't have
That's true. I didn't.
Chris Matthews able to announce to the nation that this just sent a thrill down his leg.
Well, we had to wait a couple of days for Axios to have that honor.
Yeah, but really not quite the same thing. And
No,
fragmented
not
news,
unifying.
most people won't see it, which is the important thing. So I just thought, as a reminder, it would be really helpful, for example, to highlight this Associated Press article,
Oh,
which is
I'll go look.
a look at the history of presidential assassination attempts in America. Just a short list, including and
It's
starting
not a
with
short list.
Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
successful. James Garfield,
Yes.
he was
success.
assassinated 6 months after taking office, walking through a train station in 1881.
As so often happens.
Yeah, and was shot. William McKinley,
Yes.
shot after giving a speech in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
And he died 6 months, 6 months after the term seems to be the thing, succeeded by Teddy Roosevelt,
Yeah. He was also shot.
who was also shot.
This is a good time in America.
Franklin Roosevelt,
hell's going on?
at the time president-elect, had just given a speech in Miami from the back of an open car in February 33.
Didn't have
Gunshots
yet.
rang out. He wasn't injured,
Okay.
but somebody convicted of shooting at the president.
All right. Well, that'll solve the mystery of what the loud noise was.
Harry Truman, staying
Oh.
at the Blair House across the street from the White House. Two gunmen broke in.
To the Blair
Truman
House.
was not injured, but a White House policeman and one of the assailants were killed in an exchange of gunfire.
Wow. Some of these I don't think I knew about. Well, I mean, if they don't shoot the president, then they don't
Right.
write it down.
An interesting factoid that is associated with this. The fellow who shot at Truman
Yeah.
and killed a cop was named Oscar Collazo. He was arrested and sentenced to death. In
did that
1952, 2 years later,
Huh.
Truman commuted the sentence to life in prison,
Well.
and he was released from prison in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter,
Huh.
who believes in forgiveness.
Yes. And I guess still does. It's tremendous. He did lead the Iowa straw poll for the Republicans for a short while afterwards, but only in the 2000s. He was very old. Would have been one of the oldest assassins ever elected president.
So one of the more recent ones, at least in terms of, hey, I'm old enough to remember this, is John Kennedy, of course.
Yes.
Famous. Don't need to go over that one.
No.
Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford.
Gerald Ford.
Famously assassinated by wolves.
By
as I
wolves.
recall.
Tom Brokaw
Oh, no.
announcing the news.
Okay. Well, yeah,
Gerald
Gerald
Ford was actually shot
shot.
at twice, interestingly enough,
Huh.
17 days apart.
I don't think I know
So
about
Trump
the
has a
second
long
one.
way to go to beat that record.
Yeah. Well,
Ford faced two
16
assassination
days.
attempts within weeks.
Huh.
And was not hurt in either incident, which
That
is why
is
you can make
amazing.
fun of it.
One
And
of them
Trump
was the
really
stairs.
wasn't hurt either, so you can make fun of that too. In the first attempt, Ford was on his way to a meeting with California's governor in Sacramento when Charles Manson disciple Squeaky Fromm
That's the one I know about.
pushed through a crowd on the street, drew a semi-automatic pistol, pointed it at Ford. The gun wasn't fired. Fromm was sentenced to prison and released in 2009. 17 days later, another woman, Sarah Jane
Yes.
Moore.
Huh.
Gerald Ford had a problem with women, apparently.
Yeah, the demographics
Confronted
are
Ford
terrible.
outside a hotel. Moore fired one shot and missed. A bystander
did.
grabbed her arm as the second shot was attempted, and she was sent to prison and released in 2007.
Well, I'll be darned.
So there was those. Of course, Ronald Reagan, very
Yes.
famous one. A lot of people
President,
were shot
famous
there, including his
president.
press secretary, James Brady.
Yeah. Changed
With
his mind. He
all
was
of that.
humbled and moderated.
And famously, John Hinckley, who was the shooter,
Yes.
arrested and confined to a mental hospital after a jury found him not guilty by reason of insanity. This was the Jodie Foster obsession guy.
Yes. I remember him.
After it
That.
happened and after Reagan had recovered, et cetera, all sorts of Jodie Foster jokes were really, really prevalent. I don't know if you remember them, but there used to be fake news, fake emails from Ronald Reagan, to one of his opponents.
Huh.
Or about one of his opponents.
Fake emails. They didn't even have email.
He would write John Hinckley, who was still in prison.
Okay.
But potentially in 2022, for example, Hinckley was freed from court oversight after a judge determined he was no longer a danger to himself and others. But the satiric, and it is satiric, folks.
Okay.
The satiric message to Hinckley would be along the lines of, I'm running for president again, and my opponent is such and such, and, he's a good man, and I want you to know that I bear no ill will to you, John Hinckley, but I did want to mention that my opponent is trying to date Jodie Foster, just so you know.
Okay.
Kind of
Yeah, I see. All right. Well, there's rich history.
There's a rich history of being shot at. There's a rich history of actually hitting your target and killing the president.
Yeah.
And there's a rich history of mocking it.
Yeah. I mean,
and just that's the way America is.
Yes.
So in this mission accomplished moment, in this post 9/11 environment, when you're not allowed to say, maybe Bush screwed up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just remember all of that. Because
that's true.
There's going to be all sorts of pushback about what you say and what you do. Democrats can't campaign on this. Democrats have to give up the election and concede. It's all garbage.
Yeah, right.
It's all garbage. As of tonight, Biden's campaign has already announced, since the Republican National Convention is starting with all sorts of garbage going on there.
Yeah.
They're resuming campaigning tonight because they should, given all of this. It was appropriate for a 48-hour pause or however long it was.
It was appropriate to offer it. I mean, the hand was slapped.
And it's also appropriate to get rid of it.
Yeah, right. So now it's time. You can you don't have to deal with it. It is amazing to note the Republican convention starts this week. It is this week. And I did, spend a moment thinking about it, just like, well, okay, so supposing events had gone differently, I did think about, boy, all the time that we spent about how would you come up with a mechanism to replace Biden on the ticket if you decided that talk about a problem, right? Trump hasn't named a vice president, and that's not unusual either. Sometimes it's very frequently done at the convention or within days of the convention, but there wasn't anybody named. And of course, he is, famous for wanting to see his previous vice president murdered. So you're not going to be able to go by default back to Mike Pence. But what if, what if he doesn't survive this thing?
Why isn't Mike Pence his vice presidential candidate? Why is he going to be J.D. Vance? Why isn't it Mike Pence?
Right. Well, because he wanted to murder him first. So, but
anyway, to complete the list, because, historians, nitpickers, and fans, don't want me to leave anybody out.
Oh.
You got to mention Teddy Roosevelt running as the Bull Moose Party candidate, who was shot at. His life was saved because he had a metal glasses case in his pocket.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So everyone should get one of those.
The fellow who shot him, John Schrank, was arrested and spent the remainder of his life in mental hospitals.
Yes.
And then, of course, Robert F. Kennedy running.
Yes, right.
Also George Wallace.
Yeah, that guy's son, Robert
you got to remember all of those. There's a unfortunately long history.
Well, yeah, we shoot a lot of people in this country. Some of those, just statistically, some of those assassination attempts might have been accidental discharges. We just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. So, when I wrote the pundit roundup this morning, aftermath of a shooting, I elected for the picture not to use Trump with his clenched fist, but rather a March for Our Lives pic. Because, this is really a gun violence story, and why 20-year-olds should have access to guns is ridiculous. Now, he didn't buy it. Apparently, it was his dad's. Why his dad didn't lock it up, we don't know.
Well,
the parents are
Renee Elmers.
And he did live at home. The parents are cooperating fully with the authorities, or so they say.
Yeah, except for locking up the gun part.
We have, that would have been a good thing to do before, but it's too late now.
Right.
The stories we're getting about how this was allowed to happen.
Oh, boy.
Basically along the lines of it's the Secret Service's responsibility. However, they generally, because they can't be everywhere and they don't have infinite numbers of people,
Yes.
they
Sure.
subcontract out the outside perimeter stuff to local law enforcement.
Yeah. I mean,
So the implication there,
speculation.
the FBI said, obviously it wasn't secured, and ultimately it's the Secret Service's responsibility, but we don't know what happened, and the Secret Service refused to participate in the press conference about what happened. But this is what we know so far.
Yeah.
We do know there was a local cop who saw him
Yes.
after being alerted by locals. And there was, I don't know if you've seen it, but this marvelous interview
No.
on BBC
Well, I
by
say.
one of their longtime correspondents, who happens to be blind, by the way.
Oh.
That's just coincidental.
I mean, okay.
And he interviewed a MAGA guy who was there outside the perimeter and saw everything.
Okay. I'm waiting for some video from one of these guys. Yeah.
So I'll send it to you. It's actually a fascinating, detailed, and really wonderful interview if you have not heard it.
I don't. Oh, okay. And if you have heard it, it sucks.
No, it's still good.
Okay. I was just wondering. That's an odd way of setting it up. I haven't seen it. I would like to.
So I'll try to get that for you.
I'm wondering whether there's amateur video or pictures from anyone in the crowd of, hey, there's a guy on the roof over there. Because apparently a lot of people spotted it. And, well, the Secret Service spotted it, according to the reporting in the Boston Globe. I don't know if you saw that, but Boston Globe, it's a newspaper up there in Boston. Now,
Right.
if you haven't seen it.
I'm sending you the video.
Yeah.
And you can play it if you want.
Wow.
I mean, it's kind of fascinating.
I don't know.
But there it is.
Okay.
And the guy is a
what am I
redhead,
doing?
but he's wearing one of those Trump hats with fake hair on top. So it looks like his own
I
hair,
did
but
see
it's
that
really
picture.
not.
I wondered what I saw a still somewhere from it, and I was like, "What is this guy doing?" Okay, that is very interesting. Let me see. How can I?
It's
get
4
to
minutes and 30 seconds, so you can decide how much of it
bottom
you
of
want
the
to
line?
see.
Okay.
But,
It's on that Elon Musk guy's thing, huh?
yeah, well,
right.
that's unfortunately where most of the good news is.
Well,
And it's
there
also
was some
very
good
hard
news there
to
this
play
weekend.
video and other stuff on some of the other sites.
yes, it is.
And
impossible.
those other sites don't embed into the Daily Kos matrix, so I can't use them, even though I prefer it.
Hold on a second here. I see that it looks like the sound is piping elsewhere, and it's coming out the speakers. But this is a 4-minute video, so it'll be rather difficult to get away
No,
with.
you can play an excerpt of it because you get the idea.
Okay. Well,
Even if you just play the first minute or so.
I may have to find in the new setup.
Where's your
I'm not
son?
Yeah. Hey, come in here and. All right. Let's see. Is it? I mean, it should be playing off of Firefox.
This sound.
Let's turn it off and then
bar
on
that
again.
out here. The soundboard is completely childproof. Come get me a child. I can't figure it out.
Yeah, that's basically. I wonder if let me try that again and see where the sound comes out, if anywhere at all. Let's see.
There it is. I hear it.
Well, yeah, it's playing in my speaker out loud and in the microphone.
That's
It's
enough.
picking
You
it
can hear
up,
it.
but
That's all
okay.
you need.
When we hear Trump up there, we're going to walk up through the field, stand by the trees out there under the shade, and watch and listen to the rally. Right? We couldn't see him, but we could hear him.
This is an amazing hat.
So we walked up,
Well, I want
and
interviews.
probably 5 to 7 minutes of Trump speaking. I'm estimating
Saying
here. I have
since
no
the
idea,
reporter is blind,
But,
he's not distracted by the hat.
We noticed the guy
Why are
crawling,
you laughing at this hat? What
bear
happened?
crawling up the roof of the building beside us. 50,
Bear crawling
50 feet away from us.
Up the roof.
So we're standing there, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle.
A rifle.
We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely.
I mean, come on.
We're pointing at him. The police are down there running around on the ground. We're like,
Well, that is pretty amazing. And by the other accounts I read,
So he goes on to say, so we told him he was
should
there.
I-
They're looking at us like we're kidding. No, he's on the roof. He's on the roof.
should I play
And,
more?
and they're not doing anything, and it's crazy. And then, of course,
is
we
nuts.
hear the shots, and that's what happened.
Yeah, I
And
can't
then he goes
imagine
on.
seeing
So
this.
then he goes on to say, of course, right after that, they shot him And he describes it in graphic detail. That's why I didn't have to rehear the rest of it.
Oh, all right. Well, never mind that part. But this is pretty. I mean, the hat.
It's an amazing interview.
It is, and I mean, the guy tells a very coherent story. Nothing wrong with the story.
And that was the first good story we got about what happened from BBC doing their job, asking people questions and listening, not interrupting them.
Not looking because he can't. But look at this hat. It is very exciting to see this hat involved in the interview. This, I mean, other similar accounts of this I had seen early on. The circulated report from one of the reporter for the Boston Globe who was on the scene describing something very similar, having spotted the Secret Service spotting the shooter, but that they spotted him some half an hour before he took his shot. And they were sitting there watching him through binoculars all this time. And then that this other local cop is the one who showed up and attempted to intervene. But I can't believe it. But the guy pointed his gun at the cop and the cop left.
Well,
because
what happened there is that a local cop did hear the commotion and tried to climb up on the roof.
Yes.
To see what was going on. And he was literally hanging from the roof when the shooter pointed his gun at the cop.
Yeah.
So the cop let go so as not to be shot.
I see.
It's not like, he decided to leave him alone.
Well, no, he didn't want to leave him alone, I'm sure. But the way it was described was that he had climbed the ladder to the roof, and that then when the assailant swung his gun around at him, he climbed back down the ladder, which, well, that's what I would do too, I guess. But yeah, it was a very weird situation all in all. But for the Boston Globe reporter,
the news is that was supposed to be the responsibility of local law enforcement.
Okay, well, it was. And then they decided not to do the thing with it. And I don't know. The Secret Service took care of it in the end, but they waited. You shoot first, they said. Very courteous.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have to tell you, it is fortunate that this BBC reporter is in fact sight impaired, because I don't think he could have conducted this interview seriously with this guy if he had seen. I mean, maybe he's just legally blind. I don't know, but he could not discern it. This is very difficult to look this guy in the face and say, "Tell me your very serious story, sir." But he's got like heat miser hair on it, for those of you who remember, sticking out from the top of his Trump 20. It looks like 2020, but it looks like he might have changed the number a little bit, maybe. It's a visor, a red visor, Trump 2020 visor, and a fake shock of bright red stick up in the air,
which works because he's got a red beard.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a red hair,
slightly different red color, but you could believe that maybe that's his hair.
So 2 other factoids we have been told.
All right.
One is that the Secret Service, watching the perimeter, had difficulty seeing the guy because of the pitch of the roof. Until he gets to the top, he's hidden from them. which you could easily, picture in your mind.
Okay.
The other factor, this is from Brian Stelter, because you had brought it up. Let me give you the exact quote.
You brought it up.
Re-Morning Joe being preempted today, a person familiar with the matter told CNN that the decision was made to avoid a scenario in which one of the show's stable of 24+ guests might make an inappropriate comment on live television that could be used to assail the program and network as a whole. In other words, the people who run the network are cowards.
Yeah.
Given the breaking news nature of the story, the person said it might make more sense to continue airing rolling breaking news coverage, and the show will be back tomorrow. So what they're doing for today is they're combining feeds from NBC, MSNBC, NBC Now, which I guess is their streaming version of it, NBC and doing it as 24/7 breaking news, the old "Where's the Missing Plane" CNN style. And nobody watches that crap anymore. So everybody who wanted to see what Morning Joe really thought turned it off.
Okay.
So I don't know what kind of ratings this is going to get. I do know for myself, after a tragedy like this, I almost never watch cable news for 3 days because I'm not interested in mission accomplished style coverage. I'm just not interested in it.
Well, none of this mission was accomplished, but that's the only style
but you know
of
what I
coverage
mean. Where they glorify stuff and hagiography and all this sort of stuff for no good reason.
Yeah, well, and they don't know. I mean, because they don't know anything.
They don't know. As a matter of fact,
this was a great opportunity to not do this. What?
That morning, I had posted on Twitter just a reminder that everybody who claims to know what's going to happen has no idea what's going to happen next.
Right.
Now, that was not because I had foreknowledge. But I didn't know what's going to happen next, and I still don't know what's going to happen next. So all the predictions about what this means politically, Gerald Ford was shot twice within a 17-day span, and lost. Just a reminder.
Oh, right. Yes, that too. And all the historians were out with their stories and saying it's actually quite rare, and maybe only one
it's
example
like a debate.
they could think of.
Shooting at the candidate is like a debate if you miss. Because it doesn't really affect what the public thinks.
Yeah.
They get a sympathy bump, but it doesn't last. It's called a bump because it doesn't last.
And it's not entirely guaranteed that there will be one. If you are a normal president, I guess you should anticipate a sympathy bump. If you are a horrific, abusive, wannabe dictator, I don't know, maybe no bump.
Well, again, in this polarized era, the reason that Democrats think that there might be a political benefit to Trump is simply because this motivates his voters to actually show up. Which is often the case that they don't. On the other hand, and I can't say this clearly enough, nobody has any freaking idea what's going to wind up happening.
Well, that has to be acknowledged. And I don't know.
It's such an unusual situation. And people,
it does
older
happen
people,
quite a lot.
The ones who actually vote regularly, do remember Mission Accomplished and Freedom Fries and all the nonsense.
Yeah.
And how bad it looked a couple of years later. And just because media hasn't learned anything and MSNBC is afraid and they don't want to say anything that could reflect badly on them, both now and in the future, when a dictator is in power, I get the fear. But, we report the news without fear or favor. That's nonsense. They are terribly afraid of Republicans and they don't report the news.
Yeah. Well, clearly here, I mean, they took the show off the air entirely.
It's an opinion show. You're supposed to have opinions.
What a weird thing to do. And like I said, there's probably, I'm not a big Morning Joe fan, but certainly this is one of their more successful shows. There's probably, millions.
One of my favorite pollsters had something to add to this.
Yeah.
Natalie Jackson said, my opinion for years has been the 24-hour news cycle is the worst thing to ever happen to American politics, and absolutely nothing in the last few weeks has changed that.
I think I'm in agreement there. That has always been terrible. I mean, even as early as, when was it? I don't know. When even Jon Stewart was pretty clear about it. Yeah, this is the worst thing to happen, and part of the reason is they have to fill the time with something that appears news-ish, and so you had Crossfire, and
right, exactly,
not really actually very helpful at all. Anyway, it has been remarkable, the things that they've had to cover and what they've decided to do to cover it. And I guess even worse, I suppose, than having to deal with the 24/7 news cycle on television news is, I guess, now the internet has made it possible. It brings it, the magic of the internet gives us the 24/7 print news cycle as well, and everybody has to churn out content. So that was really something. Some of it was worthwhile.
With special bonus reruns of I Love Lucy.
Yeah. Speaking of reruns, I did find out last night. For those of you who are wondering whether I afterwards got off the air and tested and asked my kids whether they knew what Gilligan's Island was, I did, and they don't. So there you go.
Inconceivable. They know where that came from.
Maybe the context through which they would know any of these things.
This word means what you think it means.
Yeah.
This is an iconic cultural touchstone. I used to teach my medical students by showing them that clip.
Oh.
You have to know this. You are too young to ever even conceive of what inconceivable means. And I do not think this means what you think it means. You have to watch these two clips because you have to know. So I would insist that they watch it.
Yeah.
Not teaching anything about medicine until you watch these clips.
There's no way for you to contextualize it without it.
Right.
But these kids today, they don't know anything. So some of the content that made the rounds was kind of interesting. As I mentioned to you that there was this Boston Globe reporter, James Pindell, who's, familiar, I think.
Very familiar. James Pindell started out in New Hampshire and knows New Hampshire like the back of his hand.
That's the
and then
I heard,
does the political reporting for the Boston Globe. He's really good. So
he was sent to the rally, and he didn't know they were going to shoot him at the time. So he went, and he describes a lot of this similar thing, although his description of things is that, critically, that there was some 25 minutes prior to the shooting that the Secret Service was clearly agitated and had identified the assailant as a potential shooter. But I guess there's no thing in the reporting, but I think we can piece together in his reporting, but piece together from other reports that perhaps there was any number of different kinds of confusion. As you mentioned, maybe the line of sight wasn't great.
Well, another thing to mention too, and I say this from a previous life doing emergency management.
Yeah.
And that is that if you get disparate groups together who are not used to working with each other, if you throw them together a week before an event, they are not going to be able to communicate for various and sundry reasons. You have to drill it first. If you don't do the drill, you won't see where the weak spots in communication are. And let me just give you some, clear examples. If you have medical people and law enforcement and let's say, teachers and education people at the same event, school shootings, for example, or just the tank on the top of the roof ruptured and the school has to be evacuated, so on and so forth. The three groups use different language.
Yeah.
The terms law enforcement uses don't mean anything to educators.
Don't mean anything to
anybody. The terms
anybody.
educators use means nothing to medical people.
Perpetrator, please step out of your vehicle.
Yeah, that
what?
Right. Well, they're in the break room. What, where, who, whatever it is, if you're not speaking a common language, you can't communicate. And the communications channels are generally different. Law enforcement may be on a different frequency for local compared to the Secret Service. The idea that the Secret Service spotted something and all they have to do is call their local law enforcement person, who do you call?
Yeah.
Let's say a bystander notices something and mentions it to the local cop.
Yeah.
Who do they report to? They don't have the direct
Tell
line
the
of the
BBC.
Secret Service sitting on the top of the roof. They have to call their supervisor, who has to call the Secret Service supervisor, who has to find the guy who's sitting on. That takes time.
Yeah, it does.
If you don't drill
the
it,
logistics.
It's not clear, it's not smooth, it's not automatic, and there's no way to assume that it is.
That is an excellent point. I'm always fascinated by the true logistics of things, when you really break it down, how will it work or how could it work. the wrinkle for me is the time that we're talking about, the 20 plus minutes, and that this shooter is all of a brisk 30-second jog away from the law enforcement who are there. I guess I can also speak with some knowledge, having done a few presidential race advance dispatches and set up for presidential appearances in various cities. The drill among professionals, and again, we are talking about it's the Trump campaign, and they pride themselves on not bringing professionals to the game. But among professional advance people, when you get someplace and you land in your city, almost immediately you're under the command of the Secret Service, and the coordination is actually really rather remarkable. And it's your one opportunity to watch local cops be ordered around by somebody they don't really want to listen to all that much and have to do it anyway. They're pretty clearly in command. And, order of the day number one is, this is the channel that we're all using. If you want to know what's going on today and you're a cop, you're on this channel. If you're not a cop today. Let's get that straight.
So, and people don't know this, right? So the guy interviewed on BBC with the visor and the fake red hair.
Yeah.
Right? If he sees something on the roof, in a perfect world, which doesn't exist, he walks up to a local cop and says, listen, I need to either speak to your incident commander or I need to get a message to your incident commander. Now, it's important. If you don't do that, the cop is going to say, well, who's this nutcase that just walked up to me with this conspiracy theory?
Right. So there's very definitely holes in the story. This James Pindell's story just lays out what he saw and nothing more, nothing less. And he says, this is just what I observed. So there's no attempt at explaining, well, what is it that in the 20 minutes they don't send more people over? I'm reading the story of the cop who climbs the ladder, and it's like, these guys want backup when a dog barks at them. Where's the backup? There's a possible presidential assassin. I'll check it out. How does it go? How does it go that way? How does it go down? At one cop goes that there's no, but I have even having been involved in advanced work, I still largely have a maybe a TV land view of how these things work, that in 20 minutes with a possible shooter with a rifle observed on a nearby rooftop, he's not that far away. Maybe get a golf cart.
Again,
I don't know.
Unless you drill it, urgent messages generally don't get to where they need to go in a timely manner.
It's rather remarkable. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all shakes out. But, your regular everyday breakdown in smooth operations, and this time with potentially disastrous consequences.
Well, that's number one, potentially disastrous consequences. And number two, because the breakdown happens, that spawns all sorts of conspiracy theories about it. Washington Post was pretty good at covering this.
The usual conspiracy is the people who handled it were not very organized.
Well, it was a setup.
It was
a false flag.
No. Yeah, if you're making a conspiracy theory, that's boring. You don't want to tell that one. You tell
It was the deep state.
Yeah, the usual real explanation behind something that seems so crazy, such that no other explanation is possible but a conspiracy theory, usually comes down to we didn't really do very well.
Yeah. So here's the headline from the Washington Post and the subheader. Misinformation spread swiftly in hours after Trump rally shooting. Conspiracy theories swell around false flags, deep state, Biden, and the Secret Service, filling the information vacuum as consumers choose their own reality, which is in fact true.
Yeah.
And one more reminder, because I think it's also really important to emphasize, outdoor venues by their nature are much more difficult to secure than indoor venues.
Yes, too many doors. That's usually, as the Republicans.
It's been hot. I don't know if you've noticed around the country the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Why does Trump do all these things outdoors? If it's so difficult to secure.
Yes.
And the answer is because they're cheaper.
Yeah. Nobody, and people with indoor venues don't want to rent them to him because he doesn't pay.
Yeah. Well,
So, yeah, that's true. It's much cheaper. And
it's much cheaper to just do the whole thing in a Four Seasons parking lot.
Also easier for him to lie about the crowd size. I believe they were already out there today saying that there were 50,000 people there. And the pictures make it fairly obvious that was not the case. But, that happens. That has happened a lot with him, and it doesn't seem to make a difference. By the way, the other content of the day yesterday was, by necessity, some profiling of the rally attendee who was killed,
yes.
The local fire chief.
Yes.
And that too, kind of in default mode, everybody, there's certain things you can and cannot say about somebody who's been killed as a innocent
in the first
bystander.
24, 48 hours.
Yeah. Though as it turns out, we got an early hint as his family spoke to the press, of course, and said all the typical glowing things about him. And although there was the tip there of we were very upset because this was supposed to be an uplifting event for us, which is an odd way of describing, I think, a Trump rally of 2 hours of his complaining and screaming
about. You're going to be there for the uplifting part of it. Seeing everybody else.
That
tailgating.
Is supposed to be it. Yeah. So
partying.
At any rate, it did tip off people that, okay, well, all right, the people who think this was an uplifting event, will there not be a trail somewhere? And allegedly there is, in what appears to be this guy's Twitter account, also making the round. So now I guess we have about 24 to 48 hours before somebody attempts to prove that this is or isn't his Twitter account. But a very enthusiastic Trump fan who brings his whole family for an uplifting day of listening to Trump talk about deporting 20 million people is going to leave behind a trail of things that are not that uplifting and
right. The Washington Post also covered, the New York Times also covered, which I think was very good. This piece here, some political figures who condemned Saturday's violence spoke from experience. Judges, members of Congress, and local election officials have all been besieged with threats of political violence in recent years. Leads off, of course, with Gabby Giffords, who, despite her challenges after she was shot in the head, remains very articulate, at least in print, if not in person. And they go over some of the other people who, over time, have been exposed to political violence. Gretchen Whitmer, for example, of Michigan, who you may remember was the target of a foiled kidnapping plot.
What?
That people tend to overlook.
But I thought we were being
a person who had written threatening emails to Representative Pramila Jayapal. Showed up outside her house with a gun. Somebody smashed a storm window at the home of Senator Susan Collins.
Yes.
And then, of course, the people who shot up the game that Steve Scalise was injured at.
Yes,
so
much more
there's a number of people who are in a position of saying this is really bad. And then, of course, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, who tweets, we're in a battle between good and evil. The Democrats are the party of pedophiles, murdering the innocent unborn, violence and bloody, meaningless, endless wars. They want to lock up their political opponents and terrorize innocent Americans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of my least favorite, which is to say I cannot stand him, TV pundits is Scott Jennings, who is on CNN, who basically said this was all the Democrats' fault.
Yes,
now, MSNBC is censoring themselves because they don't want to say anything wrong.
Right.
And CNN features this guy.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of never-Trumpers, because he's a Republican, there's a whole bunch of never-Trumpers who are saying they really need to get Scott Jennings off the air.
Yes. Scott Jennings is a very poisonous figure. And just on a personal note, I guess my dad, in speaking to me over the weekend over this thing, was like, who is this a-hole on CNN? Is he a congressman? Who is this guy? And I had to check it out, which I discovered over the weekend, by the way. I guess I never switched over to the all digital or all high def direct TV. So all of a sudden when I need it, hey, I don't have any of these channels. So I had to go online to watch everything. But yeah, Scott Jennings was on, and he was the first one out of the box to float the idea that it was Democrats' violent rhetoric that had led to this. All the, the violent rhetoric we're talking about. well, actually, most of the examples I can think of are actually Republicans.
Yes.
Anyway, the point is that Democrats were to blame for all this, and Marjorie Taylor Greene making herself a nuisance over the weekend as well. And in case you're wondering about all that violent rhetoric and what happens, and also, by the way, some of the CNN types took the bait and said, well, we all need to tamp down on our rhetoric. Both sides really need to calm things down. And, well, that's a mistake. I mean, in terms of interpreting what's going on. But it's their rote response to almost everything. Well, both sides need to tamp down on the rhetoric. But what would make this a both sides issue would be if the Democrats if the shooter had lived and pardoned him, and then he ran for Congress and was elected. That would be more both sidesy than what's going on now.
Well, I expect Kyle Rittenhouse to run at some point.
Sure. I mean, there are January 6th defendants running for Congress. Ronnie Jackson in the middle of the Trump administration.
That's Ronnie Johnson.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry. Yes. He told me I could call him either one. And it's just fine. And for Marjorie Taylor Greene, let's just, by way of reminder, this is a person who made videos of herself harassing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and staff through the mail slot of the office door they had locked against her intrusions, and taunting them
she
through
was a congressperson.
Yes, right? And then went on to be elected afterwards to Congress, and then make a nuisance of herself there every day. But this is the one who stalked the Parkland, Florida shooting victims who had come to lobby Congress and ask why they wanted to take away everyone's guns. This is a woman who, like we said, shouted through the mail slot, daring Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Yeah, she's nuts. And then they said after that, you know what? Let's elect her to Congress. Let's put a member's pin on her. Let's give her daily access to the floor. She says she wants to carry her guns everywhere. I think we should give her a way to get around the metal detectors. And they did. But both sides. So
David Frum writes in The Atlantic, the gunman and the would-be dictator, violence stalks the president who has rejoiced in violence to others. And he starts out by reminding everybody that when Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, was attacked, Trump jeered and mocked him.
Yep.
One of Trump's sons and other close Trump supporters promoted false claims that Paul Pelosi had brought the onslaught upon himself, et cetera, et cetera. Trump belittled the threat to Gretchen Whitmer. Lock her up, lock them all up, he said. Fascism feasts on violence. In the years since his own supporters attacked the Capitol to overturn the 2020 election, many of them threatening harm to Pelosi and Mike Pence, Trump has championed the invaders, would-be kidnappers, and would-be murderers as martyrs and hostages. And now we have this. It's sadly incorrect to say, as so many have, that political violence has no place in American society. In fact, it's part of American political history, as we read from the AP. So face it. Don't, avoid talking about it is the point. And to wait 48 hours, fine. But then get yourself back in the game. This is from Gabe Schoenfeld over at The Bulwark. The truth about political violence, to condemn the attack on Trump's life, requires being honest about his candidacy.
Oh, dear.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Do these voices like J.D. Vance, who was horrible, the central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs, and that led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. That's why I think he'll be the VP. Do these voices have a point? Gabe Schoenfeld writes, we don't yet know the motives, but Donald Trump does, in fact, pose a threat to American democracy. Second, there is indeed a celebration of violence and a whiff of fascism emanating from Trump and the MAGA crowd. And the examples are legion, and he goes ahead and gives a bunch, including starting with Paul Pelosi. You have to come back to that because,
that's the
tell me what you say, tell me what you do.
Yeah.
And that's it right there in a nutshell. So I'm just going to finish by pointing out Bill Scher has a very good article today in Washington Monthly. Get a grip, Democrats. You can still win this. Biden's not far behind. The economic conditions remain excellent and getting better, I should add. Okay. And a vile assassination attempt in July doesn't determine November's result. Remember Gerald Ford. So with that, that's my segment for today.
Okay, I can accept that as a complete submission for today. It was a hell of a day to have.
I'm not asking for an incomplete. I think I got it all in.
Yeah, right. No, I think we got enough to mark you here. So pretty good. And it's a rather spectacular play that the Republicans are going for, but they don't really have much else for this one. But one, blaming it on the Democrats. Two, trying to both sides it. And three, proposing things like, well, the best way to unify the country at this point would be...
is to submit to our rule.
Yeah. For one, for Biden to drop out. And two, before he does, for him to issue pardons for Donald Trump and dismiss all the pending federal cases against him.
Which he actually said he thinks is coming.
Oh.
Which is nonsense, of course. But he said that.
Yes.
I have been told that these things are coming.
Yeah.
Of course they're not. Anyway, that's it for me.
Okay.
See ya.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Greg. And we'll head into the second hour here in just a few minutes. And I think, it looks like I'm hoping all the sound system will work. But we're not quite there yet for the music. But this would be I suppose, an opportune time to double back. The one thing that could get in the way of my mentioning at the top of the show that it's my brother Mark's birthday. Happy birthday, Mark. And he's constantly contributing stories to the show. And so you all kind of know his name and have heard it mentioned before. Even though I should probably be protecting his anonymity because, fascism is on the march and everything. But happy birthday, fascism is on the march. And what a weekend you had to celebrate with. And who knew that the birthday announcement would be preempted by an assassination attempt against Donald Trump. I might have told you ahead of time that was the only thing that could get in the way and distract from it. And I would have been right. And I was, and it did. And see, that's how right I really am. Okay. So now we're almost about ready for our musical break that will take us into a 1-minute pause for us to reset, decide on a direction for the second hour. It may also be largely about Donald Trump almost being assassinated. Probably will be. It was the dominant story of the weekend. But there were some other things that happened, and we'll see whether any of them are intriguing enough to drag us away from this one. I don't know. What did we say? 24, 48 hours, where the rest of the news announcing world was frozen. We'll fill that void with speculation instead. It's our job. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. This just in, NYC Southpaw carries the news to us. Judge Cannon went ahead and did it. No pause in activity in the federal courts just because Donald Trump something. Judge Cannon went ahead and did it. She has dismissed the documents cases against Donald Trump. And by the way, how? Was it directly off of the Supreme Court's ruling about presidential immunity? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that this, I think, is where the argument for it came from, but no in the sense that it's not purely, well, he's just immune to it. She adopts Clarence Thomas's ridiculous appointments clause rationale, apparently, in her order granting the motion to dismiss the superseding indictment based on the appointments clause violation. That is to say, the argument championed by the most wackadoodle of the wackadoodle crowd, and of course Clarence Thomas, who should be impeached, and thank you to AOC for filing the impeachment articles last week, on the theory that, well, Jack Smith can't indict Donald Trump on these charges because he was illegally and unconstitutionally appointed as special counsel because reasons. There you go. How do you like that? Former President, the beginning of the order reads, former President Trump's motion to dismiss indictment based on the unlawful appointment and funding of special counsel Jack Smith is granted in accordance with this order. The superseding indictment is dismissed because special counsel Smith's appointment violates the appointments clause of the United States Constitution. Special Counsel Smith's use of a permanent indefinite appropriation also violates the appropriations clause, or the appointment, well, it says the appropriations clause. Okay, yes, but the court need not address the proper remedy for that funding violation given the dismissal on appointments clause grounds. I don't know what they are, but I don't need to address them. The effect of this order is confined to this proceeding. Womp womp. And so Tanya Chutkin may yet decide that no, the January 6th case against Trump isn't dismissed based on my finding that Clarence Thomas was totally right, that the invented idea that he was improperly appointed somehow means anything. But for Eileen Cannon, to everyone's shock and dismay and total surprise, has agreed with this. So there you have it. You cannot impeach him. You can't try him afterwards. Usually they say the only remedy left after that is assassination. Somebody decided to try that one. And so I don't know what to make of it. I guess everyone should try again. Probably not the assassin should. But I don't know what happens with this case, if anything, whether the order can be appealed or not. But I guess we'll find out shortly. What a day. What a week. Okay. So, yeah, other news is happening, although that's a pretty wild one for openers. Other things that we had put aside, well, there was, I guess before the weekend, we might have said, oh, you know what was big news that we should be talking about? The case against Alec Baldwin over the accidental shooting and death on the set of his shooting of his, well, the other meaning of the word shooting of the film. Is it a film? Is it a series? Rust? I don't know. Well, anyway, guess what? The case was dismissed against Baldwin before the week was out last week. You'll probably recall this story, and I think we discussed it a little bit, and I was a little bit surprised, but as it turns out, they weren't trying him on the original theory of the case, that as producer, he had made various decisions that led to an unsafe environment on the set, but rather they were trying him on some different theory, and apparently it all fell apart, and it fell apart over some prosecutorial misconduct as well. In case you are interested, I have the New York Times coverage about it here. The Rust case against Alec Baldwin is dismissed over withheld evidence. Really quite bizarre. The involuntary manslaughter case against Baldwin fell apart after an envelope of ammunition that the prosecution had not shown the defense was brought into the courtroom. And as you may know from the film that explains everything legal and all criminal procedure, quite accurately, My Cousin Vinny, right? It's called disclosure, and you know why. You know what comes next. And you can't do this. Well, Julia Jacobs reports this for the New York Times. A judge in New Mexico dismissed the case against Alec Baldwin on Friday after finding that the state had withheld evidence that could have shed light on how live rounds got onto a film set where the cinematographer was fatally shot. That's another one of those stories like the Secret Service story. How does this actually happen? Tell me the logistics. Why you don't need live ammunition in shooting a film ever for any reason. Why is it here? And I think the only answer I can give you is that on film sets, the weapons are handled ordinarily very professionally, very carefully by people called armorers, I guess. And they are highly trained and, certified and yada, yada. And they're the ones responsible for making sure that they have realistic weapons, but that they are properly outfitted so that they can fire the blanks that they need. Or what do they even need it for? I don't know. Good point made over the weekend here at home. Why isn't CGI taking care of this stuff? But then, of course, you'd be eliminating union jobs and who knows. But anyway, yeah. So the problem, I think, maybe starts with, well, what kind of person becomes a film set armorer? And the answer is typically a gun nut. And what does a gun nut keep a lot of around the house? Probably, guns and ammunition. Another weird problem, apparently the blanks that you use on a film set don't look hugely different from live rounds, which is maybe that's something else they want to modify at some point in the future. Well, anyway, back to the article. The dismissal was with prejudice, meaning that the prosecution of Mr. Baldwin is over, and if he had been convicted of involuntary manslaughter, Mr. Baldwin would have faced up to 18 months in prison. There is no way for the court to right this wrong, Judge Mary Marlowe Sommer said in court as Mr. Baldwin wept. It was a stunning end to the trial of Mr. Baldwin, who was rehearsing with a gun on the Rust film set in 2021. When it fired a live round, killing Helena, I'm guessing, Halyna, Helena Hutchins, the movie's cinematographer. Mr. Baldwin had been told the gun was, quote, cold, meaning it had no live ammunition, which... Of course it doesn't have any live ammunition. No gun on this set would have any live ammunition. It might not even have any blanks in it, possibly, but wow, very weird and very dumb all around. The dismissal followed a dramatic scene when the lead prosecutor, Carrie T. Morrissey, went from questioning witnesses to taking the stand herself. You don't see that a lot. She gave an account, well, you see it in the film Bananas, though, Woody Allen film, if you're still willing to watch one. You can go back and see it, and it's quite humorous when he does it. But then, there's a whole Paul cast over the movie. Okay, anyway, she gave an account of why a batch of ammunition that had been turned into the state several months ago by a witness who claimed it was related to the Rust shooting had been put in an entirely different case file and was not handed over to the defense. It was my impression that they did not match the live rounds from the set Rust, Ms. Morrissey said on the stand, saying that she had only viewed a photo of the ammunition. But when the ammunition was brought into the courtroom earlier Friday at the judge's request, it became clear that some of the rounds resembled those found on the Rust set. I don't know if that's really a great expert opinion, but okay. The new evidence was brought into the courtroom in a manila envelope. Judge Marlowe Sommer put on blue latex gloves, cut it open with a pair of scissors, and got down from the bench to examine the ammunition inside of the well of the courtroom as the prosecution and defense surrounded her. The examination determined that 3 of the rounds did, in fact, resemble the live rounds found on the set of Rust after the shooting. I never saw them until today, Ms. Morrissey testified when she took the stand. The failure to disclose the ammunition posed a major legal problem because the state is required to turn over key evidence to the defense. They buried it, Luke Nikas, the lawyer for Mr. Baldwin, said in court. They put it under a different case with a different number, which, sounds like it could be intentional, it could be an accident. Nobody knows. I'm not so sure. The judge's order lifted a significant weight from Mr. Baldwin, a television and movie star, in case you didn't know, whose life and career has been under a shadow of potential criminal liability for nearly 3 years, as the case against him has gone through a series of twists and turns. Baldwin still faces civil lawsuits, including one from Ms. Hutchinson's husband, Matthew Hutchins, Hutchins, not Hutchinson. Although a settlement was announced in that case, it's not been fully resolved. We respect the court's decision, a lawyer for Mr. Hutchins, Brian J. Panish, said in a statement on Friday. We look forward to presenting all the evidence to a jury and holding Mr. Baldwin accountable for his actions in that senseless death in civil court, of course. There's still a lot of questions swirling about that and the weird way in which the public views Baldwin chiefly as an actor. That's chiefly how we know him, but he's also the producer of this film, and early on it was reported that it was some of his decision making that may have led to some activity on the set that should not have taken place, apparently, when the official armorer was not available, and that they hired a rather junior person to handle these things. And it was an interesting prospect of a case when it was going to center on does it make a difference that if you decide to cut corners for whatever reason in the production of your film and something goes terribly wrong as a result, well, yeah, it doesn't matter that you're also an actor on the set. It's not my fault. I'm just an actor. They handed me a gun that said it was cold. Well, who handed you the gun? The armorer. Well, who hired the armorer? I did. But I'm busy acting, What am I doing?
Acting!
Exactly. So, I don't know. That one didn't seem like a great dodge, but it might be better or more susceptible to that argument and that kind of proof in civil court than criminal. This is a weird twist about this evidence, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, if the judge comes to believe that this was withheld purposefully, there's not much else that's likely to happen but for the case to be dismissed. I don't know how she comes to that conclusion. That's not really discussed here. I don't know whether it's worth that much. I would think that you would think on appeal, perhaps, if it had gone the other way, a private attorney might be appealing something like this. So you were determined that these bullets matched by what? Having the judge pour them onto the floor out of an envelope and look at a picture of some other evidence and say, yeah, that looks like more or less matches. Is that it? Is that expert opinion? I don't know. All right. Well, that could have been a bigger portion of our show today had there not been so much excitement over the weekend. All right. Other stories to share with you, and there are many. I mentioned to you, let's see, I think we did discuss at the end of last week a little bit about the story of speaking of alleged assassination plots, the alleged assassination plot it is said, by Russians to take out the CEO of a German arms manufacturer that has been selling critical weaponry to Ukraine, and how odd that whole story was. And there's did I archive this or did I save this somewhere? It seems to me that it was a CNN story, but the CNN story I've clicked on turns out to be a different one. I may have archived it, but we didn't read the story thoroughly. And I thought it was probably something we should read alongside another report that I have here at the ready. But let me go back and take a look and see if this story about the arms manufacturer isn't perhaps in the archive, because I thought there were some interesting twists and turns to that story, but then I thought that was the reason why I had left it unarchived so that I could go back to it, but it's now not immediately obvious. I'll take a quick look around and see if we can't find it elsewhere. But, this may be it. And I believe it's a CNN story, and so, yeah, that's why. They don't display their pictures and headlines very well or very reliably in Pocket. But here it was, something that I brought up on Friday and was then an exclusive. Maybe there's now more reporting about it. U.S. and Germany foiled Russian plot to assassinate CEO of arms manufacturer sending weapons to Ukraine. And I want to run through the narrative of the story. U.S. intelligence discovered earlier this year that the Russian government planned to assassinate the chief executive of a powerful German arms manufacturer that had been producing artillery shells and military vehicles for Ukraine, according to 5 U.S. and Western officials familiar with the episode. The plot was one of a series of Russian plans to assassinate defense industry executives across Europe who were supporting Ukraine's war effort, these sources said. I just realized I've intentionally, once again, had the chance to avoid it, intentionally walked into a story where I'm going to have to pronounce German names and possibly words. But let's see how this goes. The plan to kill Armin Papperger, P-A-P-P-E-R-G-E-R, Papperger, and I don't know, that doesn't even sound like a particularly German name. Maybe Papperger does. Armin Papperger, a white-haired Goliath who has led the German manufacturing charge in support of Kyiv, was the most mature. That struck me there. What? The most mature? What do you mean? Oh, it was the plan was the most mature among the ones that they said they had discovered the Russians hatching for attempts on the lives of arms manufacturers. Not that he was the most mature individual that they were targeting for assassination. When the Americans learned of the effort, they informed Germany, whose security services were then able to protect Paperger and foil the plot. Now, I am mindful that this stands in stark contrast to when certain other Americans learned of the effort to assassinate Donald Trump. They were not able to alert security services, who were then not able to protect Trump. But, across the ocean, somehow it worked out pretty well. And that might be because, well, the Biden administration was in charge of it. And the charge on Friday was, well, with Donald Trump in charge of things, should U.S. intelligence come into possession of this information, there was likely to be a tip, yes, but not to Germany, rather to Russia. Russia, if you're listening, you need a plan B to assassinate Armin Paperger because your plot has been discovered. But instead, in the Biden administration, they called the German government and said, you need to do something about it. A high-level German government official confirmed that Berlin was warned about the plot by the U.S. For more than 6 months, Russia has been carrying out a sabotage campaign across Europe, largely by proxy. It has recruited local amateurs for everything from arson attacks on warehouses linked to arms for Ukraine to petty acts of vandalism, all designed to stymie the flow of weapons from the West to Ukraine and blunt public support for Kyiv. Although, I guess at this point, it would be wise to note that is a very significant, a quantum leap, if you will, from, well, petty vandalism to outright murder. It's not beyond the Russians. The Russians have conducted assassination plots on foreign soil before, but not in this context against arms manufacturers, although it's very easy to see that a totally lawless and very transactional oligarch leadership of Russia would almost certainly feel unconstrained in ordering such a thing. They clearly don't believe that there are serious consequences that can be brought to bear against them for anything short of war, and they don't believe that we're going to do that. But the intelligence suggesting that Russia was willing to assassinate private citizens underlined to Western officials just how far Moscow was willing to go in a parallel shadow war it is waging across the West. I mean, they don't share that intelligence with us, but the allegation certainly is. The serious intel here not only is the name of the target, but the fact that our intelligence sources believe the Russians are serious about trying this. Paperger was an obvious target. His company, Rheinmetall, that's not difficult looking, Rheinmetall, is the largest and most successful German manufacturer of the vital 155 millimeter artillery shells that have become the make-or-break weapon in Ukraine's grinding war of attrition. Now, Rheinmetall, I don't know if I'm pronouncing everything correctly, Rhein, metal seems right, though, Metall, metal. I don't know whether there's any further emphasis on that last syllable or not. But the company is opening an armored vehicle plant inside of Ukraine in the coming weeks, an effort that one source familiar with the intelligence said was deeply concerning to Russia. After a series of gains earlier this year, Moscow's war effort has once again stalled amid redoubled Ukrainian defenses and punishing losses in personnel. The series of plots not previously reported helps explain the increasingly strident warnings from NATO officials about the seriousness of the sabotage campaign, one that some senior officials believe risks crossing the threshold into armed conflict in Eastern Europe, and certainly switching over from petty vandalism even to major arson of weapons warehouses, but crossing the line into assassination, yeah, that does risk crossing the threshold into armed conflict. We're seeing sabotage. We're seeing assassination plots. We're seeing arson. We're seeing things that have a cost in human lives, a senior NATO official told reporters on Tuesday. I believe very much that we're seeing a campaign of covert sabotage activities from Russia that have strategic consequences. The National Security Council declined to comment on the existence of the Russian plot and the U.S. warning to Germany, but NSC spokesperson Adrian Watson said in a statement, Russia's intensifying campaign of subversion is something that we are taking extremely seriously and have been intently focused on over the past few months. The United States has been discussing this issue with our NATO allies, and we are actively working together to expose and disrupt these activities, she said. We have also been clear that Russia's actions will not deter allies from continuing to support Ukraine. The National Security Council declined to comment on the existence of the Russian plot and the U.S. warning to Germany, but NSC spokesperson Adrian Watson, hey, this seems like it's a total replay of the same paragraph. And in fact, it does look like they just ran those two paragraphs, one after the other, twice for some reason. Okay, so you'll be happy to know that Adrian Watson's statement did not change over the past few seconds. Interesting. The United States, to continue with the other part of the article that they had here, has been discussing the issue with our NATO allies, and we are actively working together to expose and disrupt these activities. She said, we have also been clear that Russia's actions will not deter. Oh my God, I just did it again. This is the funniest thing. You're not thinking clearly necessarily when you're reading out loud and on the air, but I just said that it was two paragraphs that had been repeated. And there they are. Wow. Okay, let me just triple check these don't happen again, right? No, here's some more text that is totally different from what I have just read. Damn it. German officials, what a waste of time, declined to comment on the specifics of CNN's reporting, but speaking on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Washington on Thursday, remember that? Germany's foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, said, it shows Russia is, quote, waging a hybrid war of aggression on European allies. We have seen that there have been attacks on factories. And this underlines once again that we as Europeans must protect ourselves as best we can and not be naive, Baerbock said. In a separate statement sent to CNN, the German Interior Ministry said that Berlin, quote, will not be intimidated by Russian threats, emphasizing that they are fundamentally aimed at undermining the support of Germany and our partners for Ukraine in its defense against the Russian war of aggression. The spokesperson for Rheinmetall, Oliver Hoffmann, declined to comment. The necessary measures are always taken in regular consultation with the security authorities, Hoffmann said. CNN has asked the Russian embassy in Washington for comment, but guess what? They're probably unlikely to say anything other than perhaps to deny it all. Now, there's another section of this article that is entitled NATO members seeking to strengthen intel sharing. That seems super important, right? We'll read a little bit of this. I don't know if we'll make it all the way through it, but then I can skip over to this other article that was the other point of bringing this one back to the fore. Russia's sabotage campaign has been a major point of discussion among NATO officials gathered in Washington for the bloc's 75th anniversary summit. NATO has sought to improve intelligence sharing across the alliance so that the nations will be able to connect the dots between what otherwise might appear to be disparate criminal activities unique to their own country. That is a good point, right? I don't know what's on. All of our warehouses are burning down in all these separate countries, and no one knows why. What do they have in common? Let's talk. But the campaign, and in particular Russia's willingness to take lethal action against European citizens on foreign soil, if that is indeed the case, has raised difficult questions about how the alliance should respond. In theory, under Article 5, an armed attack on a NATO member state is an attack on all. But who wants to be the first to launch nuclear weapons on that one? Russia's sabotage campaign has at times smacked of a shotgun approach carried out by amateurs. Some of the crimes linked to the campaign have not had obvious links to the conflict in Ukraine. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, that's true, this person's name really is Donald Tusk, publicly suggested that a fire at an IKEA in Lithuania could have been the work of Russia, for example. Okay. He must have had some reason. In Poland, CNN has reported a Ukrainian man was recruited over Telegram by a Russian handler that he never met in person and was paid $7 to spray anti-war graffiti. That doesn't seem to lead anywhere. Murder? I don't know. Later, he was asked to plant surveillance cameras and burn down the fence of a Ukrainian-owned transportation company. Yeah, this doesn't necessarily hang together, but the intelligence services say maybe there's something to it. Some analysts have referred to the effort as a hybrid campaign, one that uses non-military tools like propaganda, deception, and sabotage. But U.S. and European officials are gradually hardening against defining Russia's sabotage efforts in that way. I fundamentally reject the idea that what we're seeing is a hybrid campaign from Russia. There are hybrid elements of it. When I think of hybrid, I think of defacing monuments, the senior NATO official said, the things that meet the traditional definition of below the threshold of armed conflict. The problem of calling this hybrid is they now suspect that it rises above that threshold. If you're actually killing people, that's not exactly all that hybrid. That's the theory. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's so much to get to, and so little time, and yet here we go. We're going to go back into the story about the alleged Russian plots to assassinate leading arms makers who are supplying weapons to Ukraine. So there was some fight over whether or not to call this a hybrid campaign. One NATO official arguing that time has come and gone now that they are plotting actually killing people. That's not hybrid. That's just war. Because Russia is recruiting operatives to carry out arson and plotting assassinations, lethal action, I'm not confident that all those fall below this threshold that hybrid implies, this official said. It was not clear whether the intelligence related to Rheinmetall suggested Russia intended to kill Papager directly or hire a local proxy. They're going to outsource it. I don't know that it matters a great deal, but in terms of catching the right person, I suppose so. Other Russian efforts have been far more serious than spraying a little graffiti or vandalizing a diplomat's car, which I guess also happened. U.S. military bases across Europe were placed on heightened state of alert last week for the first time in a decade after the U.S. received intelligence that Russian-backed actors were considering carrying out sabotage attacks against U.S. military personnel and facilities. Multiple sources familiar with the matter told CNN. That seems like actual military engagement. But again, they make it something other than Russia sending its army to fight America's army on European soil. It is, I don't know, something bad happened to American assets that are attached to the military, but we can't yet prove who did it. And even when we do, by the time we prove it, the whole thing's gone cold. What are we supposed to do? And that's what the Russians would likely be relying on. that there would be confusion about how to respond, hesitancy about how to respond. So let's exploit that. It is a real possibility. In April, 2 German-Russian nationals were arrested for allegedly plotting bomb and arson attacks on targets, including U.S. military facilities, on behalf of Russia. You deny it and see what America wants to do about it. In London, in March, several men were charged with working with Russian intelligence services to set fire to a Ukrainian-linked warehouse. Poland is investigating whether an arson attack that destroyed Warsaw's largest mall in May was connected to Russia and has arrested 9 people in connection with Russian-linked acts of sabotage, the Prime Minister said in May. And French authorities last month detained a Russian-Ukrainian man who was allegedly building bombs as part of a sabotage campaign orchestrated by Moscow. Lots of different Western European governments seem to think it's happening. I don't know what to say. They're doing it now because they believe that as there are a number of elections happening throughout the West, this is a prime opportunity to try to undermine public support for Ukraine, the senior NATO official said. The official also said that Russia sees a window of opportunity before additional weapons and ammunition promised by the West arrive on the battlefield in Ukraine. For Russia, this is a prime time to target the West in these types of operations to try to undermine support and prevent the flow of weapons there. So, why bring it back up today? What does it have to do with Donald Trump? We should read it alongside this entry from Politico, published also at mid last week. Then an exclusive by Politico. Headline, Trump, remember he's running for president, considering cutting back intel sharing with Europe, officials warn. Well, who would think that would be a great idea? It might be the Russians who are getting caught by shared intelligence in their plots to sabotage Western response to and support of Ukraine. Seems like something they'd be interested in. It doesn't, it tracks. Subheader here says, European officials say they can rely on U.S. intelligence to help fend off Russian aggression on their own soil, like the Germans did. But remember, that doesn't have to happen. Donald Trump, if he were president, whether he was elected to the job or not, could opt, allegedly, as an official act, to simply decline to share that kind of information with European allies and give it instead to the Russians. Donald Trump is considering a reduction in intelligence sharing with members of NATO, which depends on the U.S. for the type of information that has helped Ukraine fend off Russia, according to foreign officials informed of the plans. Trump's advisors have told allied countries the reduced intel sharing would be part of a broader plan to scale back U.S. support and cooperation with the 32-nation alliance, according to 3 European officials and a senior NATO official who were granted anonymity to discuss internal discussions. The officials said they learned about the proposal to curb intelligence sharing during discussions with Trump advisors about broader plans to reduce U.S. involvement with NATO. The former president repeatedly questioned and sought to undercut the alliance during his first term in office. The curtailment of intel could have dire security consequences, especially for Ukraine, as it tries to repel the Russian invasion. It's the American intelligence that helped convince a lot of NATO countries that Putin was resolved to invade Ukraine. One European official said some countries didn't believe Russia had the capabilities to carry out a successful military campaign, and they may not, but they did try it anyway. Asked for comment, a spokesperson for the Trump campaign did not respond directly, instead referring to a statement on Truth Social that the former president, quote, will restore peace and rebuild American strength and deterrence on the world stage, just not with any intelligence. The curtailment of intelligence under a possible future Trump administration was a topic of discussion at this week's NATO summit, according to the officials, as well as a senior U.S. official. All of them were provided anonymity to discuss this. Reducing U.S. intelligence sharing could reduce Europe's ability to withstand a Russian invasion. in Ukraine and elsewhere, I guess, should President Vladimir Putin decide to expand military operations on the continent beyond Ukraine, the senior U.S. official said. President Joe Biden expanded the amount of intel the U.S. shares, particularly related to Russia, with foreign allies. The European official said it is unclear whether the Trump administration is considering returning to the previous level of intel sharing or cutting back even further. Concerns about Trump's plans if he wins re-election, or even if he doesn't, come up as NATO ramps up efforts to gather evidence about suspected acts of sabotage, including arson, linked to Russia across Europe. Russia right now, they're committing actual acts of arson and sabotage and planning assassinations on Allied soil, all in an effort to undermine support for Ukraine amongst our domestic populations, the senior NATO official said. And that, I think, was printed on the 10th, and just by way of timing, the exclusive report, if it is in fact exclusive, came out in CNN about the plot to assassinate the arms manufacturer on the 11th. So it wasn't something that the NATO official read in the newspaper and repeated, though it may have been a tip he gotten that may or may not be substantiated, but it shouldn't surprise anyone that a NATO official would know a day in advance of the publication of this story that there were assassination attempts alleged in Western countries. So where were we? Yes, the U.S. has increased intelligence sharing with NATO in order to help support the response to these sabotage campaigns, and that's having a real impact. The U.S. has always shared certain information with its allies to, for example, help them prepare for a potential terror attack or help the alliance bolster itself against an immediate military threat. During Trump's first term, his intelligence officials towed the line, sharing intelligence with its closest security partners, including those in the Five Eyes alliance. It did not go above and beyond what was requested or what was required or what was custom. Okay. The Biden administration has taken that responsibility to a new level, devising a strategy to bolster its intelligence collection on Russia and share that intelligence widely with its allies across the globe. It has shared sensitive intelligence with allies in cables, in diplomatic conversations across the globe, including in Africa, and in briefings between top intelligence leaders and their counterparts. Intelligence sharing among NATO members and with Ukraine has been absolutely essential to counter Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, as well as to uncover and thwart other destabilizing Russian activities in Europe and beyond, said John Brennan, former CIA director. A cutoff or significant scaling back of U.S. intelligence sharing with NATO allies and partners would have an immediate, profound, and potentially long-lasting adverse impact on Western security interests. But if you're Trump, who cares? That's the idea. The Biden administration's increased intelligence sharing has also been part of a broader strategy to try and counter Russian influence and military might in corners of the globe where the U.S. has traditionally dominated, including countries in Africa. U.S. intelligence briefed to NATO over the past 3 years has provided Washington's partners with vital information about Russia's movements on the ground in Ukraine, including its military maneuvers and tactical advancements, the U.S. official said. It has also highlighted Moscow's partnerships with Iran and North Korea and its consistent use of Chinese military technology to aid its military operations. At a speech at Georgia Tech in 2022, CIA Director Bill Burns said American intelligence was vital to the war in Ukraine, adding that the war had offered valuable lessons on how to develop good intelligence and deploy it openly and creatively to discredit the false narratives on which adversaries so often thrive. While European countries have also established high-level intelligence offices, U.S. intelligence is often more robust, officials said, particularly on certain issues related to Russia. Without detailed information sharing, officials worry European countries will become even easier targets for Russia. Still, there is certain information the U.S. relies on receiving from its European partners. And if Trump were to hold back intelligence, they too would likely retaliate, one recently retired senior U.S. official said. Almost as harmful as ceasing operations, or cooperation rather, with our European allies is the fact that they're likely to hold back intelligence from us, given Trump's pretty fast and loose handling of classified information, a case against him having just been dismissed. One former senior U.S. official said, there are things that our allies know that we don't know, that we count on when it comes to certain sources. U.S. allies at the NATO conference warned of that danger as well. As one of the European officials said, intel sharing is often two-way traffic. And I think, wasn't it Dutch intelligence that was like actually inside the Internet Research Agency and was able to trace all of these active measures directly back to Russia? Well, what could be better than Trump sabotaging that relationship that proved the truth of Russian election interference on his behalf? Of course, he's going to want to get rid of that and do anything that would motivate the Europeans to withhold that kind of information from the U.S. So why don't we take the balance of our time to take a look back at a publication from July 1st outlining the stupid theory by which Aileen Cannon has today dismissed the documents case against Donald Trump. What great news for him. Yes, he was shot, sure. But that's a downer. But on the upside, Aileen Cannon is doing the job we asked her to do and dismissing all the cases. What is this stupid theory, and how stupid did people think it was before it was actually implemented by Aileen Cannon? That's the idea here. In the New York Times, Clarence Thomas raised another issue. Was Jack Smith legally appointed? In his concurrence to the immunity decision, the justice questioned, all by himself, whether there was a legal basis for naming the special counsel at all, a topic also being explored by the judge in the documents case. How odd. Alan Feuer, who everyone knows, wrote this up for the Times on July 1st. Most of the Supreme Court's decision on Monday, way back when, about executive immunity was focused like a laser on former President Donald J. Trump's indictment on charges of plotting to subvert the 2020 election. But a small part was also relevant to the other federal case that Mr. Trump is facing, the one in Florida, in which he stands accused of illegally holding on to a highly sensitive trove of classified documents after he left office and then obstructing efforts to retrieve them. It's as open and shut as there ever was a case, and yet here we are. In a brief concurrence to the immunity opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas said he was joining the majority's position that Mr. Trump enjoyed a substantial amount of protection from criminal prosecution, but he also advanced his own reason for making that decision. He suggested that the special counsel, Jack Smith, who is handling the two federal matters against Mr. Trump, was given his job without a legal basis. I should point out, although Aileen Cannon is entitled to make this finding anyway, all on her own, she can't say that there is Supreme Court precedent for it. Clarence Thomas's concurrence is not joined in that part by, I don't think, any other justice. He's kind of alone on that. So there isn't Supreme Court precedent on that point. There's just one opinion that stands alone in a document where every other justice had every opportunity in the world to join in concurring in that part of his opinion, and I don't think anybody did. That same question, as we said, is currently being considered by Judge Aileen Cannon, who is presiding over the classified documents case in the Federal District Court in Fort Pierce, Florida. Not much more than a week ago, Judge Cannon held 2 days of unusual hearings in Fort Pierce, specifically to discuss the issue of whether Mr. Smith had been properly funded and appointed as special counsel. Mind you, this argument has been raised before in other federal courts and found so wanting as to be dismissed outright prior to Aileen Cannon taking it up. But Aileen Cannon says, to hell with it, we're going to do it. And this is another one of those things where it's like, no, this is a cuckoo bananas legal theory that nobody believes in. Well, I'm going to do it anyway. Crap. Now we got to deal with the fallout of this. All right. Justice Thomas never explicitly mentioned Judge Cannon or the documents case in his 9-page concurrence, but he did recommend that, quote, lower courts look into the, quote, essential questions concerning the special counsel's appointment, which is exactly what happened at the hearings in Fort Pierce. The justice also declared that there should be consequences if Mr. Smith was indeed appointed without a legal basis. So it's a terrific fantasy. If there is no law establishing the office that the special counsel occupies, then he cannot proceed with this prosecution, Justice Thomas wrote in what seemed to be a reference to the election interference case that could easily hold sway in the classified documents case as well, and now has. A private citizen cannot criminally prosecute anyone, he wrote, let alone a former president. What? Justice Thomas has faced criticism for hearing issues related to Mr. Trump, given that his wife, Virginia Thomas, known as Ginny, helped shape the effort to overturn the 2020 election. While Mrs. Thomas has played no role in the classified documents case, evidence has emerged that she pushed hard to keep Mr. Trump in office during the chaotic weeks between the last election and the January 6th attack on the Capitol. By signaling that Mr. Smith's appointment was in doubt, Justice Thomas adopted Mr. Trump's own position on the issue. Yes, he's argued this 5-6 times in court and lost every time. Suddenly, though, he won, so that's cool. In their arguments in front of Judge Cannon last month, the former president's lawyers claimed that Mr. Smith had not been named to his post by the president or confirmed by the Senate like other federal officers. They also said that Attorney General Merrick Garland, who gave Mr. Smith his job, had no legal power to do so on his own. Yes, no one has ever heard of special counsels before. We don't have those in this country. Sorry, can't help you. There only have been like 500 of them. Mr. Smith's deputies have countered that under the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, agency heads like Mr. Garland are authorized to name inferior officers, like special counsels, to act as their subordinates. Justice Thomas, in his concurrence, questioned whether Mr. Smith was, in fact, an, quote, inferior officer, and even whether his appointment was valid unless a statute created the special counsel's office and gave the attorney general the power to fill it. Unless, of course, it was a Republican president using his unitary executive powers to appoint him or to direct the attorney general to appoint him on his behalf, and he's also immune from any sort of prosecution for it because it's obviously an official act. But did you say he was a Democrat? Yes? Oh, well, then he doesn't have that right. Thank you. Despite Justice Thomas's concerns, courts reaching back to the early 1970s have repeatedly rejected efforts to question the legality of independent prosecutors. So, there's a history and tradition here, but it's not from the founders. So one justice doesn't like it. And so now something, Eileen Cannon says, same thing. I mean, they've done this 100 times. Courts don't buy it, but you are all pre-wrong. You all thought that the results from court rulings all the way back to the 1970s were something you could rely on. And it isn't true. They were wrong when they did it. The founders knew eventually there would be special counsels and totally prohibited them in invisible ink in the Constitution. So there you go. So all of these rulings have included for instance, the Supreme Court. I don't know if you guys have heard of this court. Justice Thomas works there. They have upheld the appointment, for instance, of Leon Jaworski, one of the special prosecutors who investigated the Watergate scandal, in a decision that was largely focused on the issue of President Richard Nixon's claim of executive privilege. Judges have also tossed out efforts to invalidate the work of special counsels like Robert S. Mueller III, who examined connections between Russia and Mr. Trump's 2016 campaign, and David C. Weiss, who has brought 2 criminal cases against Hunter Biden, President Biden's son. And what do you know? All of those special counsel appointments were upheld, but this one strikes a particular judge in a single judge division in Fort Pierce, Florida, as detrimental to somebody she likes a whole lot. And so there you go. That's the law. It was dumb when it started. It's been dismissed 100 times. But this time, what can I tell you? The dice must be loaded. I don't know. It's just coming up snake eyes. I don't know why. All right. So, that's kind of interesting. I thought you might want to find out about that one. Here's something else just to switch gears for a little while. Although, well, maybe I should follow it up with this because it makes a little bit more sense. It flows a little better. There's a little bit more of a segue here. But it does mean handing the show over to Amanda Marcotte again. And we do an awful lot of that. Don't let her know about this because she'll want a piece of the gigantic donation action. Maybe not. She's very fair-minded, and she's probably happy to have her stuff read here. We're happy to read it. This time, she's very topical. I don't know. Maybe her brain just works the same way, and she goes to the same stories that I do for various reasons. And so I'm grateful she does. Her piece from end of last week. Damn it, isn't that good enough for you? July 12th. There you go. Proof. End of last week. AOC understands the stakes. It says the high crimes of Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito must be prosecuted. It's about time to get around to that. And by the way, you might wonder about the precedential value of a concurrence in part that names a completely different theory of the case to which no one signs on. One justice from among 9 is interested in putting their name to it. And by the way, he might be hugely corrupt. The corruption of Supreme Court justices is about more than greed. It constitutes a clear danger to our democracy, which, as you know now, is Republican for, oh my God, AOC is trying to assassinate Clarence Thomas. By the end of the day, we'll have gotten to there. Here's how Amanda puts it. Corruption is one of those issues that tends to rile up political professionals and journalists, but not so much ordinary voters, interestingly enough. Sure, everyday people don't like it when politicians and other public officials have their hands in the cookie jar, but it can be hard to see how bribe-taking and favor trading have a meaningful impact on the much ballyhooed kitchen table issues. During focus groups, such as those shared on Sarah Longwell's often infuriating but always illuminating podcast, voters often assume everyone in politics is corrupt. It doesn't shape partisan preferences as much as one would hope, though there is evidence that corruption can suppress voter turnout over time. Anyway, in the past couple of years, there have been 2 dominant stories driving down the public's respect for the Supreme Court: bad rulings and outright corruption. And sometimes they combine in one person. The latter has been a big deal in the press because it provides all the aspects that make for exciting journalism, uncovering secrets, cataloging damning facts, and of course, exposing colorful details that make a story pop. Even if the dollar amount of gifts granted to Justice Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are hard to remember, no one can forget those photos of Alito gloating over the fish he caught on his free luxury Alaska vacation, or the original painting that was commissioned of Thomas hanging out with Harlan Crow, his billionaire benefactor. However, polling data suggests the soaring disapproval ratings of the Supreme Court owe more to their bad decisions. Those stories about corruption are not helping. The public's trust in the court started to tank especially hard after Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, the case that overturned 5 decades of abortion rights. That was a full year before the public learned that Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society had been introducing the justices to far-right billionaires who would lavish them with gifts. But the loss of abortion rights, which directly affects the lives of countless Americans, has always been a parallel story to the Supreme Court's corruption, without much effort by politicians or journalists to link the 2 stories together. In fact, the court's corruption is deeply intertwined with the bad decisions that are inflicting harm on millions of people, and that's why I was pleased to see Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York file articles of impeachment against Thomas and Alito last week now, accusing them of high crimes and misdemeanors for hiding the millions of dollars of gifts received from billionaires. She also charged them for not recusing from election-related cases, despite substantial evidence that they and their wives have insurrectionist sympathies, to say the least. Despite her strong social media presence and lefty credentials, Ocasio-Cortez has earned a reputation as a serious leader and not one prone to cheap political stunts. She wouldn't be doing this if she weren't serious, even though she fully admits it will go nowhere in a GOP-dominated House. It's also a big deal because Ocasio-Cortez is known for being a nuts and bolts politician. While she is conversant in more abstract topics, she's celebrated for her skill at explaining in an accessible way how economic and health care policy impacts people's lives. She has been one of the most effective elected officials speaking out against Dobbs, for instance. This is precisely why she's the perfect person to take the lead in keeping the corruption story alive. She's well positioned to explain how elite corruption is a big reason why the Supreme Court keeps issuing dangerous opinions that hurt ordinary people, or that let elites off the hook, like Trump, I would add. In her speech introducing the articles, Ocasio-Cortez drew a direct line between the corruption of Thomas and Alito and the suffering of the American people. She argued that we cannot pretend that this corruption is wholly unrelated to the pregnant Americans now suffering and bleeding out in emergency rooms because of the Dobbs decision penned by Alito. After all, Ocasio-Cortez noted, banning abortion was a key political priority of those undisclosed benefactors and shadow organizations surrounding Alito and Thomas's misconduct. It's likely easier for journalists and voters to see the direct link between the bribery-shaped behavior of Thomas and Alito and decisions that benefit businesses at the public expense. This term had many such decisions, notably Loper-Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, in which the 6 conservative justices hamstrung the ability of bureaucracies like the EPA to pass regulations. With so-called social issues like abortion rights, however, mainstream journalists still tend to act as if the justices aren't being influenced by money and power to rule against human rights. For example, Michael Martin, is it Michelle? Michael, M-I-C-H-E-L, Michelle Martin, I don't know how it's pronounced, of NPR, recently asked Ocasio-Cortez if it's possible billionaires are giving them these gifts because they know how they're going to vote on issues like abortion rights, not as a way to influence their vote, i.e. now as a gratuity, which is okay, as if a thank you gift is somehow functionally different from a bribe. I don't know whether she knew that the Supreme Court had in fact declared that that was the case. Anyway, I am now way behind on the music. Time to get out of Justice Putnam's way here for the rest of the day. Let me see if I can squeeze in another note or two here. Ocasio-Cortez has a talent for framing these issues in terms of class warfare that cuts through this kind of noise. In 2022, she had a memorable response to complaints that Justice Brett Kavanaugh had a fancy dinner at a steakhouse interrupted by protesters. She mocked him on Twitter with, "Let him eat cake." Not bad. She has an intuitive grasp of the theme that ties all these various Supreme Court stories together. The right's desire to replace equality under the law with an authoritarian two-tiered system. People like them get all the privileges and goodies, while the rest of us are left choking on air pollution and dying of lack of medical care. Members of the Republican elite, especially Donald Trump, are allowed to commit whatever crime they wish and get immunity, while the rest of us are criminalized for basic body functions like pregnancy or needing to sleep. The rest of us risk death from mass shootings because selling bump stocks makes Thomas's rich buddies a little richer. Stated plainly, the links seem obvious, but it's generally true that the material impacts of court corruption often fall by the wayside in these discussions. There's much more, of course. You're invited to read it for yourself. We're fading out. That means it's time to go and hand things over to Justice. We'll see you tomorrow.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And in fact, Justice finds himself called away from the microphone today, though he has programming lined up for you in the form of the background briefing with Ian Masters in place to take over as we disconnect from the stream today. We will likely be back in place tomorrow. We'll talk to you then.